My stepdaughter wants my house as a wedding gift and says I'm not invited unless I give it to her. There's just one problem. I'm paying for the entire wedding. I married my wife about 8 years ago. She had a daughter who was 14 at the time. Her biological father was technically present in the sense that he existed, breathed, and showed up once in a while, which was basically the same as saying he was a useless father because he was inconsistent, unreliable, and contributed practically nothing. If my wife had been in a relationship with a rock and that rock had gotten her pregnant, it probably would have been a better father than he was. I knew what I was getting into, and I had no children of my own. I was not naive about the dynamics of a blended family, and I was not trying to be anyone's hero. I simply thought that if I was going to be part of my wife's life, I would try to get along with her daughter for the sake of the relationship. Even so, she was never warm toward me. I want to be honest about that. I would not say she was unpleasant because she tolerated me. She was polite in the way teenagers are polite when they have been told to be. Superficial, minimal, just enough to keep the peace. She got engaged a couple of years ago to a man I barely knew. I had probably seen him 5 or 6 times in total over all that time. He seemed fine to me, a little quiet, but I do not have much to say about him because, well, we have hardly exchanged many words. I am not one of those step-parents who has strong opinions about whom their stepchildren are going to marry. What I did do was agree to help finance the wedding. My wife came to speak to me privately without my stepdaughter present and asked whether I could contribute because, as the mother of the bride, she felt she had a responsibility. I said yes, and my wife seemed genuinely grateful. She told her daughter, and I received a message from her saying, "Thank you for helping me. This gesture means a lot to me." That seemed fine. She was acting like a grateful person, not an entitled one. I guess it was a trap or something. The planning began, and almost immediately the budget started drifting away from what we had discussed at the beginning. First it was the venue. The one they had originally looked at, which fit what I had agreed to pay, was no longer good enough, so they found another one that cost more. Then it was the catering package because the standard option was not good enough and they wanted to upgrade it. After that came the photographer, because the one within their original budget was not the one she specifically wanted, and the one she wanted charged almost twice as much. Every one of these conversations came through my wife, who relayed them to me as though she were simply passing along information rather than actually asking me to spend more money. But she was always asking me to spend more money. I agreed to more than I should have. I added a little here, covered a deposit there, and before I actually sat down and added everything up, I had already exceeded my original offer by a considerable amount. When I finally did the math and mentioned it to my wife, she brushed it off. I told my wife clearly, "This is the total. This is the maximum. Not $1 more." She agreed. My stepdaughter was not told directly, which I will admit was a mistake on my part, but I trusted my wife to communicate it to her. At that point, I had no reason to think this would turn into what it eventually became. Fast forward a couple of months, and I received a message from my stepdaughter, not from her mother, but directly from her. I want to be precise here because the actual content of that message is the entire reason I am writing this post. She said she wanted the house as a wedding gift. We are not talking about help with a down payment on a house or a voluntary contribution. She wanted the entire fucking house. My house. I replied with a laughing emoji because I thought it was a joke that someone with no sense of humor would find hilarious, and I did not give it much thought. But the seed of entitlement had already been planted, and she was genuinely coming after my house. First the wedding, then the house, then who knows what, maybe my soul. Her reply came within minutes. "So you're not coming to the wedding?" I did not respond after that. I showed the exchange to my wife, and I want to tell you that I expected her to be as shocked as I was. I expected her to read those messages and immediately call her daughter to put an end to it. In some alternate universe where my wife loves me and has the wisdom to understand that what her daughter was demanding was insane, she probably would have defended me. In this universe, things went very differently. She did not really say much. She looked at the phone, handed it back to me, and said something about how maybe her daughter would be better off receiving one major gift from us, and that perhaps there was a conversation to be had. I asked her directly whether she was seriously considering the idea of me giving away my house. She did not say yes, but she did not say no either, which, in retrospect, was the answer that mattered. She asked for time to think about how to resolve the situation, but I gave my wife a better option. Either she told her daughter that the house was completely off the table and that I would be attending the wedding, or I would withdraw my funding. She said she would speak to her daughter, but time passed and I heard nothing more about it. No update, no confirmation, no message from my stepdaughter retracting anything. My wife never brought it up again. She simply went about her days as if the conversation had never happened. Then I received a notification from the wedding planning group chat. I opened it and realized I could not see anything new. I had been removed. I went to my home office, opened my bank account, and spent the next hour contacting every vendor I had paid directly. I canceled or froze every payment I could. Some deposits were gone forever. I knew from the beginning that I would lose some money, and I accepted that without losing any sleep over it. But the larger amounts, the ones that had not been fully processed or were still within cancellation periods, I got back. I transferred all of that money into my personal account, the one that existed before this marriage and is solely in my name. I did all of this before saying a word to anyone. Once it was done, I messaged my wife. I told her that financing the wedding would now be her daughter's responsibility or hers because I had canceled everything I could, and I would no longer be involved in financing a wedding to which I was not invited. I told her that she and her daughter had made this decision, not me. My stepdaughter removed me from the wedding. My wife said nothing, and I was not going to pay for things that were no longer my responsibility, especially after being disrespected like that. If you are married, imagine your wife furious. Now multiply that by 2 or 3. She pulled out the entire repertoire of phrases explaining, according to her logic, what a terrible husband and stepfather I was. She called me impulsive over something that was supposedly easy to fix, and said the situation did not justify such an extreme decision as canceling the payments. The consequences of withdrawing the funding were even worse than I expected, but I did not feel bad about that either. The vendors I canceled took other jobs and were no longer available for the wedding even if someone came up with the money. The photographer she specifically wanted, the one who cost twice as much and for whom I had paid a deposit, was gone. That reservation evaporated as soon as I canceled it, and within less than a week someone else took the slot. The venue they originally wanted required a deposit they could not cover without my money. The wedding was still a few months away as I wrote this, and from what I could see, it had become a fraction of what it was supposed to be. A smaller venue, different vendors, a guest list that had been brutally cut down. The worst part was that my wife and her daughter were not handling the stress of all of this particularly well together. The real problem, though, was that my wife did not seem to be reconsidering anything. Somewhere inside me, I had hoped she would see what was wrong with the situation and realize she had been in the wrong, at least because of all the years we had been married or together. But that did not happen, and at that point I believed there was only one path left, and it involved the D word. I did not expect things to reach that point. I expected my wife to eventually realize that her daughter's demands were less reasonable than those of bank robbers without hostages. Edit. I assumed this was implied, but yes, the house is in my name, and she and her daughter moved into it after we got married. It is not a palace, but it is also not something you just casually give away. I do not know what my wife expected me to do, buy another one or have us go rent somewhere. Update 1. It has been about 2 months since I posted. The short version is that the wedding is technically still on the calendar, but the wheels have been gradually coming off ever since I withdrew my funding. At this point, the whole thing is being held together more by stubbornness than anything else. The problem is that the guest list was large, more than 150 people, and initially they refused to reduce it for any reason. They have had to do it though, because the new venue technically cannot hold that many people at the same time. Unless they have somehow reserved a pocket universe with different laws of physics, there is no way everyone can fit in there. At this point, I think they should have found a clown car because they could fit a lot of people into one, and it would make a good wedding theme because it would suit them. That brings us to the Great Purge, which is the deep, brutal cut they made to the guest list. Picture this. People who had already been told they were invited, some of whom had already made travel plans, started receiving messages saying the wedding was still happening, but without them. It reminded me of the meme that says, "In terms of money, we have no money." Adapted to this situation, it would be, "In terms of your wedding invitation, you are no longer invited." As far as I know, none of those people were told the real reasons the wedding had to be downsized, much less why they were the ones being purged from it. The fiancé's family, however, started asking questions. Apparently, he had been describing this wedding to his family for months. A large venue, a long guest list, the whole dream wedding, and now he was cutting members of his own family because there was no room. If you cut an acquaintance, you damage your relationship with that person, and that is about it. But if you cut a family member, you at least have to explain why they cannot come. You cannot simply refuse to explain anything to your family and expect them to be fine with it. So they were told that Big Bad OP was responsible for the wedding no longer being what they dreamed it would be. Apparently, I am some sort of wedding Grinch who does not want to see two young people with hopes and shared dreams be happy. That last part is not literal, but that is what I imagine based on what I have heard. From what I have been told, there were some tense conversations on their side, and his family was unhappy about the reduced guest list and some other things involving the wedding. But rather than seeing me as the villain, his side of the family believes the blame lies with my wife and the groom because they were the ones making those commitments in the first place. I do not know these people, but they seem more decent than my wife, her daughter, and the fiancé. My wife and I are no longer living together. Not long after my previous post, she said she was not going to live with a monster like me who used her own daughter as an act of revenge. I told her that was fine, but this monster had a house, and I was not going to live with a wife who treated her husband like an ATM. She took offense and then moved in with her daughter, saying she hoped I would come to my senses, although if I did, there was a chance she would not take me back. She has been waiting ever since, because after she moved out, I had her served with divorce papers drafted by my lawyer. Every now and then she messages me to tell me about the chaos surrounding the wedding and try to make me feel bad. To be honest, I still have not found any remorse for what I did. I know the venue situation, the vendor problems, and the consequences involving the guest list are pretty bad, but I do not think I have it in me to feel bad about any of it. I know it is part of the manipulation, but it is not working because I have already seen what they are like. The situation with the dress is worth mentioning because it is one of those details that sounds small, but is not. She had ordered a custom wedding dress early in the planning process. Before everything blew up, part of the deposit on that dress had come from the wedding funds I was contributing at the time. The dress was eventually finished and ready to be picked up, but there was still an outstanding balance that she could not cover. Because the balance simply was not paid, the shop held the dress for a while and then sold it to someone else. I assume they just made a few alterations so it would fit another bride who had the money to pay for it. One of the fiancé's friends was cut when they had to reduce the numbers. He did not take it quietly. He told the fiancé directly that the way this entire situation had been handled said something about him and that he was not going to pretend otherwise. From what I heard, the friendship effectively ended over it. There are many more details, but those are the biggest and most entertaining things that have happened, as long as you are watching all of this from a distance. I do not think it is the best environment in which to get married, but that is where things stand for them right now. Update 2. The original wedding date was a few days ago, but there was no wedding of any kind, neither the one that was originally planned, nor the modified version. I have to put that right at the beginning, because I know it is the first thing anyone who has been following this wants to know. The engagement between my stepdaughter and her fiancé is also over. That is important because the wedding was not rescheduled. About 2 weeks before the date, with no confirmed venue yet, and the planning situation still extremely precarious because they had been unable to sort anything out for months, the fiancé ended the engagement. The reason it happened when it did, so late and so close to a date that was already falling apart, comes down to something I can only infer because I was not there to see it, but I think it is highly likely. Her mother moving into their house must have revealed a lot to the fiancé. Those two women living under the same roof must have shown him his future better than any crystal ball could have. And the pressure of the approaching date, combined with the lack of money for the larger wedding, must have had a major eye-opening effect on the guy. This situation is important because the fiancé, whom I will call Edgar to make this easier to read, contacted me to warn me about something. He knew they wanted the house as a gift, but now that he was no longer going to marry her, he could tell me something he had been keeping to himself. I know he did it purely out of spite and to get revenge on his ex-fiancé and former mother-in-law, but it benefits me because it shows me a little more of my ex-wife's true colors. It is also relevant to the divorce, which I will get to later. Edgar knew they had demanded the house as a gift, but he also knew they were not planning to live there. They were renting the place where they lived at the time, but his fiancé had told him that the house would actually be for her mother. I was supposed to put the house in my stepdaughter's name. My wife would then divorce me because she no longer wanted to stay married to me, and her daughter would allow her to live in the house. She knew the house was off the table in the divorce, so she needed to make sure I transferred it into her daughter's name before she asked me for a divorce. A pretty bad plan if you ask me, but since my wife was planning to divorce me after the wedding anyway, after I had paid for it, apparently she thought it was worth the risk. My wife's original plan, however, was to ask for the house after the wedding, once I had already paid for everything. But her daughter jumped the gun, and that was why my wife had been so quiet on the day I confronted her about what had happened. She was thinking about how stupid her daughter had been for not waiting until after the wedding. My wife planned to ask me for the house on the wedding day, and if I said no, no harm done. I would already have paid for everything. But according to Edgar, the daughter jumped the gun because she did not even want me at the wedding. She thought I might cause a scene after she asked me, and she did not want me there anyway. Nobody had explained to her that not everything had been paid for yet, and she acted on her own when she demanded that I give her the house. I have to thank her because her stupidity saved me a lot of money. I am also grateful to Edgar because I am going to use his testimony to try to prevent my wife from receiving spousal support. She had been asking for it for months, but now that Edgar can testify that she had been planning to divorce me anyway, my lawyer and I are going to fight even harder to make sure I do not have to pay it. In fact, we are going to argue malicious intent and demand that she reimburse all the wedding money her actions caused me to lose. I know Edgar did not do this because he wanted to help me. He could not care less about me. Watching his ex-fiancée and former mother-in-law suffer is what motivates him, and we are going to use that. Now that my lawyer has requested all of this, guess who came back crying and asking to be taken back? You will never guess. If you said my wife, you are only partly right. Yes. She showed up at my door crying, asking me to take her back and saying she did not want a divorce, but my stepdaughter did the same thing with Edgar, so technically you did not get it completely right. Both were rejected, but for different reasons. You already know my reasons for rejecting my wife. I have several posts explaining why I do not want to remain married to this woman. As for Edgar, my stepdaughter became angry when he left her, and she went and asked one of his friends out on a date now that Edgar had broken up with her. The friend rejected her and told Edgar, which eventually led Edgar to tell me what had been going on. That is what has kept me busy over the last few days. My lawyer thinks that with Edgar's testimony and some of the evidence he has provided, the divorce process might not have much longer to go, but I am keeping my expectations low in case there is still a long way to go. Update 3. You can be married to someone for many years and still never know them completely. I say this because, despite the fact that in a few days we will sign everything and she will officially become my ex, there are still more things happening that deserve their own post rather than having everything compressed into one. My ex and her daughter are now at war with each other over all of this, and a lot of things are coming to light. I am going to lay this out point by point to make it easier to understand. It is essentially a summary of the accusations they have been throwing at each other on social media in an attempt to attack one another. The rest of us have just been watching it like it is the 4th of July, and their attacks are the fireworks. My ex has accused her daughter of cheating on her fiancé until shortly before the engagement. At least she gives her daughter credit for stopping seeing the other man after her fiancé proposed. People attacked my ex over that revelation, though, because she had hidden the information, and revealing it now did not absolve her of responsibility. Her daughter fired back by saying her mother was responsible for many of the wedding demands and that she was not the one insisting on so many expensive things. The venue, for example, had been my ex's suggestion. She also brought up the entire plan involving taking my house, although you already know about that. The difference is that she made it public, and now it is another piece of evidence for my lawyer. That is why we are now very close to finalizing the divorce, which is leaning favorably in my direction, or at the very least appears fair enough. My ex said her daughter could not be too upset about the wedding being canceled, because only a week after it was called off, she was already seeing another man. She also mentioned her daughter going to her ex-fiancé crying and asking him to take her back. The daughter then pointed out that her mother had done the same thing with me. Finally, and most importantly, the daughter confessed that she does not actually know who her father is, and that the man she had claimed was her father never really was. That explains why this person was never present. In fact, the man knows he is not her father. He is merely a family friend who had helped my ex-wife with some expenses, and he has now discovered that my ex-wife had been using him as an excuse. That has triggered an entire family drama on my ex-wife's side of the family. Those are all the things that have been said that are relevant. Then there are smaller things, like one of them owing the other money. At this point, I am just waiting for my lawyer to call so I can sign whatever needs to be signed and close this chapter. I feel relieved that I escaped before all of this exploded, and I ended up trapped in the middle of it. Things could have turned out worse, so you can always look at the glass as half full. Edit. I am not sure how much of what they have said is actually true, or whether they are simply lying to hurt each other. If we assume those claims are true, then they have both been lying about a lot of things, so neither of them is exactly the most reliable person. Update 4. I owe you a proper ending to my story, and I think the conclusion of my divorce can provide one. There have been more accusations exchanged between my ex and her daughter during this time, but they are minor things without much relevance to you. They do not even involve me and concern things that happened before I started dating my ex. What I do want to talk about is that the divorce is complete, and there are a few relevant things that came with that. Most importantly, I do not have to pay my wife spousal support, because I earned a little more than she did. That was something she had been requesting until Edgar spoke up. That did not stop her from making counteroffers in which I would pay a smaller amount, or simply give her a fixed lump sum, in exchange for her agreeing to sign the papers. My lawyer and I said no. The only acceptable amount was 0 because that was what was appropriate. The other battle we had to fight, and also won, was forcing her to reimburse all the money I could not recover from the deposits. She never wanted to pay that because she believed it was not her responsibility. But my lawyer did a good job demonstrating that she had acted with malicious intent, and the judge ruled that she had to pay whether she liked it or not. She did not like it. She pouted in front of the judge and protested. The judge told her lawyer to stop her from interrupting, or she could be held in contempt. I do not think I am forgetting anything. I also have not had much contact with my ex-wife or former stepdaughter beyond what was necessary because of the divorce. Edit. Since some people have asked for details about those accusations they exchanged, here they are. My ex's daughter was once almost expelled from a former school for hitting a classmate after that classmate mocked her for not having a father. Her mother agreed to pay the girl's parents so they would speak to the school principal and reach an amicable agreement. My ex was once fired for stealing from her workplace. She was caught after her daughter, who was still a child at the time, mentioned what was happening in front of one of her mother's co-workers. At the time, she did not understand what was going on, but my ex made her understand it through physical violence. That is really everything I know because the rest of the accusations are fairly minor compared with those things.